What if I told you that the biggest difference between someone who builds real wealth and someone who stays broke their entire life isn't income, isn't education, and isn't even how hard they work? It's a single mental trick, a specific way of thinking about every financial decision that wealthy people use almost automatically, and that nobody ever teaches the rest of us, not in school, not from our parents, not from any financial advice you've ever read online. And the most frustrating part? Once I explain it to you, you're going to realize you already understood it intellectually. You just never learned how to actually use it. My name is Anik, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, wealth psychology, and why the gap between people who build financial freedom and people who never quite get there almost always comes down to mindset rather than math. If you want to understand how wealthy people actually think about money differently, not the generic advice, the real psychological mechanism, hit subscribe and stick around because this one is going to change how you see every purchase you make for the rest of your life. Here's what most financial advice looks like. Spend less than you earn. Invest early. Don't buy the latte. And look, none of that is wrong exactly. But it completely misses the point. Because the reason most people can't follow that advice isn't that they don't understand it. It's that their brain is actively working against them every single time they try. You know you should save money. You know that impulse purchase is a bad idea. You know that upgrading your car right now makes zero financial sense, and yet you do it anyway. And then you feel guilty. And then you tell yourself you'll do better next month. And next month looks exactly the same. This isn't a knowledge problem. This is a psychology problem. And wealthy people, not the ones who got lucky, but the ones who built real wealth intentionally, have figured out how to solve it. The psychological trick is called opportunity cost thinking. And before you click away because that sounds like an economics textbook term, stay with me because the way wealthy people actually apply this in real life is completely different from how it's taught in school. Here's the simple version. Every time you spend money on something, you're not just spending that money. You're also spending every single dollar that money could have become in the future. When you buy a $30,000 car, you're not spending $30,000. You're spending the $200,000 that $30,000 could have grown into over 20 years in a decent investment account. When you spend $150 on a night out, you're not spending $150. You're spending the $1,000 plus that amount could become over a decade. Now here's where most people get this wrong. They hear this concept and immediately think it means you should never spend money on anything enjoyable ever again. That's not what wealthy people do at all. What they actually do is use this thinking selectively and strategically. They run this mental calculation automatically on big decisions, not every small one. The $4 coffee doesn't get this treatment. The $30,000 car absolutely does. Let me show you exactly how this plays out in real life. A wealthy person looking at a $500 impulse purchase doesn't think, can I afford this? They think, what is this actually costing me? And the answer isn't $500. At a conservative 8% annual return over 20 years, that $500 is actually $2,330. So the real question becomes, is this thing worth $2,330 to me? Sometimes the answer is genuinely yes. An experience that creates lifelong memories, an investment in your health, a tool that directly increases your earning potential. Those things can absolutely be worth the real cost. But a second pair of shoes you don't need? Probably not worth $2,330 when you think about it that way. Here's the thing that makes this so powerful. It completely reframes the emotional experience of spending money. Instead of feeling deprived when you choose not to buy something, you feel smart. You're not missing out on the thing. You're choosing the future version of the money instead. That psychological shift from deprivation to strategic choice is the entire difference between someone who builds wealth and someone who doesn't. There's fascinating psychology research behind why this works. Behavioral economists have identified something called mental accounting, the tendency for people to treat money differently depending on where it came from or what category they've mentally assigned it to. Most people have a mental account for fun money, a mental account for bills, and a mental account for savings. And they keep those completely separate in their minds. Wealthy people collapse these categories. To them, all money is investment capital first. Entertainment and lifestyle come from what's left over after the investment decision is made. This sounds small, but it's an enormous psychological difference. When you see all your money as potential investment capital, every spending decision automatically gets filtered through the question, is this the best use of this capital? You're not choosing between saving and spending. You're choosing between different investments, some financial, some experiential, some relational, and making intentional decisions about which ones deserve your capital. Here's why this psychological trick never gets taught, and it's going to make you a little angry. Every major consumer industry in the world profits specifically from you not thinking this way. When you think in terms of monthly payments instead of total opportunity cost, you buy more expensive things. When you think, I deserve this, instead of, what is this actually costing me in future wealth, you make more impulse purchases. When you think about what something costs today, instead of what it costs in 20 years, you consistently underestimate the real price of everything you buy. Credit card companies, car dealerships, retail stores, subscription services, they all benefit massively from you thinking about the immediate price and not the real cost. Monthly payment thinking is specifically designed to disconnect you from opportunity cost thinking. $800 a month sounds manageable. $96,000 over 10 years, plus the $640,000 that could have been in your investment account, sounds insane. Same decision. Completely different psychological experience. So how do you actually build this habit without turning into someone who could never enjoy anything? Here's the practical version that actually works. Step 1. Only apply opportunity cost thinking to purchases over a threshold you set yourself. For most people, that's somewhere between $200 and $500. Under that threshold, spend based on your budget and enjoy your life. Over that threshold, run the calculation. Step 2. Use the 20-year rule. For any significant purchase, multiply the cost by 6.7. That's approximately what $1 becomes over 20 years at 8% annual return. $500 becomes $3,350. $5,000 becomes $33,500. $30,000 becomes $201,000. Ask yourself if the thing you're buying is worth that number to you. Step 3. Reframe the decision as a choice between two things you want. You're not choosing between buying the car and being deprived. You're choosing between the car and the financial freedom that same money buys you in 20 years. Both are real things you want. You're just deciding which one you want more. This reframe alone removes almost all of the emotional pain from making smart financial decisions. You're not sacrificing, you're choosing. And choosing feels completely different from sacrificing. The deepest version of this trick isn't really about math at all. It's about identity. Wealthy people don't run opportunity cost calculations because they're financial geniuses. They do it automatically because they see themselves as investors first and consumers second. That identity shapes every financial decision without requiring conscious effort. When your default identity is investor, you naturally ask, what does this do for my financial position? Before spending significant money. When your default identity is consumer, you naturally ask, can I afford this? Or worse, what's the monthly payment? The goal isn't to memorize a formula. It's to slowly shift how you see yourself in relation to money until thinking like an investor becomes as automatic as buckling your seatbelt. And that shift starts with one decision. The next time you're about to make a significant purchase, don't ask if you can afford it. Ask what it's actually costing you. That single question, asked consistently over time, is the entire psychological trick. And now you know it. The gap between people who build wealth and people who don't almost never comes down to income or intelligence. It comes down to this. One group sees every dollar as something to spend. The other sees every dollar as capital that can either work for them or against them, depending on the decision they make right now. You now know the trick. The only question is whether you're going to start using it. Start with your next big purchase. Run the number